Hi there and welcome to Central Texas Gardener. I'm Tom Spencer. Even though times are tough for the garden, we have much to celebrate in our plant pioneers. Today we applaud a few of them with Bill Welch in his latest edition of the Southern Heirloom Garden. On tour, let's visit a Smithville garden that takes a cue from the past.
Mitzi Van Sant knew just what she was looking for when she returned to Texas. In Smithville, she found it, an arts and crafts bungalow built in 1929 on a double-wide lot that just begged her to turn it into a garden.
When I got here, I found out about the soil, and the soil is to die for. There's about 3 feet of sandy loam over red clay. You can dig in it with a teaspoon. It grows anything. I always think about that when I buy a house.
That's not unusual, since after years as a pediatric nurse, she turned her weekend garden passion into a design career. In 1997, she graduated from UC Berkeley's Landscape Architecture program. When Mitzi returned to Texas in 2004, she found her dream house and restored it to its roots.
Then I started on the yard. There were a few shrubs, one of each kind of something or other around the edge. They were overgrown. There was no screening from them. I left them for the first year. The first year, I dug a vegetable garden, and I sat and I looked at the sunshade issues, and I got a feeling for the soil, and I thought about what I wanted to do, and I didn't really start the garden, laying out the garden, until I'd been here more than a year. I wanted to make a garden that went with the period of the house. In the arts and crafts period, kind of in the United States, it might have been a really informal sort of garden in terms of layout. What I chose to do was English arts and crafts, which has a very formal layout to it, a lot of rectilinear corners.
Mitzi divided the large space into rooms that connect to one another on formal axis definitions. Although she reduced the lawn, she's left some for croquet and running around room with her grandchildren. She also hosts community events and political rallies where there's room for hundreds of folks with lawn chairs. From the beginning, she planned a garden for future grandchildren.
I call it the baby garden, but it's a children's garden, and it has a sandbox, and it has a big concrete bowl for water play, and a little statue of St. Francis, like an infant St. Francis.
Mitzi wanted to create memories for them like her grandparents did for her.
My grandparents lived in Nebraska. We used to go see them about every 3 years on the train from Washington State, where I grew up, and there was a sandbox in actually it was my great-grandmother's garden, and it was enclosed by a lilac hedge, and you had to be a little person to get in there. There wasn't really an opening, you crawled underneath, and I've always remembered that. We would always go in June and the lilacs would be blooming and stuff, and so I think that's the fragrance and its association with things from the memories in the past, and so that's one thing I did here in my garden.
Mitzi encloses the baby garden with spring-blooming fragrant vines, sweet olive, and viburnums. Her grandchildren find their fragrant secret cubbyhole under the shrubby winter-flowering honeysuckle. Since fragrance is such a powerful sensory memory, Mitzi perfumes every avenue. From her days with the Texas rose rustlers who find and propagate heritage roses, she discovered that roses don't have to be a trauma. In her garden now, she includes old and modern, but only those as tough as the pioneers. In this late spring visit, old-fashioned garden perennials mingle with native plants.
A lot of the plants that are in this garden go with a house of that period, So I have modern cultivars of old-fashioned things in this garden, but most of the stuff that is in this garden is pretty old-fashioned.
In cool weather, annuals attract overwintering resident beneficial insects. In hot weather, Mitzi simply changes the menu.
I use a lot of pentas as an annual flower because it draws butterflies. People in town know about this garden and they come by here a lot, and I like color, but they also like color, so every year I do a lot of annuals, usually at the front of the beds in front of the other shrubs and roses. Things change. Some years I do one thing and the next year I'll try something different.
In her new home, the first gardens she laid out were for seasonal vegetables, now bordered by perennials and rose arbors.
It looks pretty all year round. When I have extras, I take them to the food pantry here in town, and they're very appreciative of that.
Along with views outside, Mitzi especially planned views from indoors. She also connects the spaces architecturally, like arbors that mimic the roofline.
Something that you can do that really makes a garden tie in with a house is look for significant architectural features on the house. And it's just a little tiny thing in the big picture of it, but I shaped the pickets on the fence to mimic the roof lines on this house. Well, I've been in this house 6 years, and it's taken me, that long to come to the place where it is now. And I change a few things like gardeners do. Something doesn't work out, and I get something new and try something different. So it's not completely, it's not fully grown yet, but I feel like it is finally coming into its own. You have to be patient if you're a gardener, as you well know.
Thanks so much for sharing your garden with us. And now we're going to be turning our attention to heirloom gardening in the South with William Welch. And Bill, it's always a pleasure to have you on Central Texas Gardener. Welcome back to Austin.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here and to visit with you today.
Well, it's such a treat for me when you are here, Bill. And we're going to be looking at a kind of an updated version of a book that you've had previously released in a new improved version, I should say. This is a book that you and Greg Grant, another renowned Texas gardener, collaborated on. What's the premise of the book?
Well, the idea of it is to look at our past and see what we can learn from it. I think there's a real message when it comes to sustainable gardening by looking at the past. We've got a lot we can learn from the design ideas that people brought with them when they came here. And these time-tested plants just give us some insight into some of the things we can do today to make our gardens a little easier, perhaps a little more interesting,
right?
And just generally make gardening even more fun.
Well, I find the gardeners are always interested in roots.
Yes,
right?
Yes, there you go. Yeah.
And
dig deeper, as they say.
Dig deeper, and we have not just horticultural roots in the sense of the different plants, but we have these cultural roots, and each culture that is kind of infused itself into Texas has brought with it garden design concepts and different plant preferences.
Yes.
And, we're kind of a happy amalgam of all these things in a lot of ways.
We really are, and the ones that are still with us, there's a message. If they're tough enough to be with us in Texas without a lot of inputs,
especially this year, right?
Yes, this has been a tough one. It has indeed. But again, the message is strong, and it's a way we can add a lot of richness to our gardens, and I think it's just part of our fascinating past that we can bring up to date.
And it goes all the way back to the Native Americans, really.
It does. And when I first started looking into this, I thought, they didn't have gardens, but wow, what did they do? They understood the medicinal plants, for one thing. They understood the native plants. They knew how to site plan. They located their villages and
pecan orchards.
Yes. And so there was a huge amount they did. I mean, they didn't have cottage gardens, but but there was a lot of message in their
living close to the earth and taking advantage of the native bounty.
That's right.
And
That's right.
I use the word pecan very specifically because that was a preferred protein source, and people would come. There actually, I know I've read accounts, Bill, of like, for example, the Comanche people who would often make hundreds of miles treks, migrations of entire villages of people just to take advantage of the ripening pecans.
Well, it's a perfect food. It came in a package, and it would last, and all of this sort of thing. So it and it was native, and so it's an interesting thing. And of course, we've so-called improved it, but still, some of the very best ones are our native pecans.
Most flavorful for sure.
Yes.
So we know that the Native Americans got the ball rolling in Texas.
They did.
But they were joined by a host of folks from all over the world.
Absolutely. The Spanish especially, brought in.
Let's talk about the Spanish influence on our gardens.
It's just really important. First of all, they brought fascinating plants. They brought figs. They brought citrus. They brought pomegranates when they came here. And those are all things that we can grow very easily today. But they did that, and then a lot of design concepts in our garden. The layout of some of our communities, with the plazas in the center, and then of course the whole patio home idea with enclosed walls and so forth is very Spanish.
Add a little water.
Add just a tiny. You don't need a lot of water to get the effect of water, and they were masters at doing that in their gardens. And the missions that they built were pretty much sustainable communities, of food and they had beautiful flowers, and so the Spanish were great gardeners, and still are.
I have to say, the idea of courtyard gardening is still one of my favorite concepts, and we see kind of a renewed interest in a lot of the plants they brought in our gardens. For example, with the citrus, for example.
Yes, citrus, and they loved fragrant things. The use of container plants, the use of tile in the gardens.
Right.
All of these things were Spanish contributions.
Well, other European nations are evident as well. The English garden, of course, English settlers were dominant in the state for a long time after the Spanish. And
they were indeed, and they brought a huge heritage of gardening as part of their culture. And we think of the cottage gardens of the South as being primarily an English thing. The mixture of plants, the way they mix them, the use of a lot of perennials. Certainly the use of flowering shrubs. All of these things were very much a part of the English garden, but it permeated their culture maybe more than just about any other.
And I think in a lot of ways that the idea of the English garden still dominates the American concept of gardening. That overflowing, bountiful border bed seems to be everybody's ideal.
Yes, and all we need to do is interpret it into our plant materials that will thrive for us and that have been time tested over the years, and that's what we're trying to communicate.
Well, in the book, you talk about some of these plants.
Yes.
For example, there's a form of phlox that is perfect for a border garden like that.
Well, it really is, and this is one that Greg Grant found in a garden in San Antonio, and he named it John Fanick for a very well-known nurseryman there. But it's a derivation of one of the native phlox to northeast Texas, but it's a form of Phlox paniculata, and it's known as John Fanick phlox, and it is now available. But what a perfect plant. It blooms in July and August with these beautiful heads of fragrant flowers, which are wonderful for cutting.
Yeah.
And it comes back every year, a little better each year. So a great perennial for us.
A plant that actually blooms in July and August.
Yes,
you got to make note of this. Right. Well, we'll see if it does this year.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
That's right.
We'll see.
This is the test.
And other parts of the world are represented too, Bill. And I'm thinking of like African Americans, a very prominent influence in everyday Texas life.
Well, they are in food plants. Things like okra come from there. The crinums that we enjoy in our garden so much today are primarily African. There are a few native ones, but the whole idea of like gumbo is an African contribution.
Right.
And artistically, well, the swept gardens that every culture in the South actually embraced came to us from African origins. So,
it's an idea that's coming back as we try to reduce our turf areas.
Well, not only that, and we look for their practical reasons. They were afraid of fire,
right.
And so they didn't want a lot of growth right surrounding the house. So
well,
they kept it swept.
In this year of wildfires on the perimeters of our Texas cities, this begins to sound like it makes a lot of sense.
Well, it does. And I interviewed an older lady that was African American and had a wonderful garden of that type in the Brazos Bottom. And I said, "Why did you do it?" "Snakes," she said. "We want to be able to see the snakes, and we don't want them, So the snakes and fire were two reasons that they gave for doing it.
Well, there's some other wonderful expressions of the African American culture we see in gardens, like the bottle trees.
Oh,
for
yes,
example,
yes.
Which I happen to love, and I know they kind of are very popular throughout the South now. In fact, probably nationwide.
Yes.
Popularized by you and other individuals. And then the crinum plant family is one that has really taken the nation by storm in the past few years.
Well, they really have. They're so low maintenance, and some of them are just plain homely, and others are just gorgeous, And so,
I think all the foliage is homely, frankly. But
yeah. Well, there's some that are a little neater and more attractive. But the main thing is that they live in our climate, and if we want to give them a little extra care, they'll respond. If we don't, they're still going to be there.
Right. And, we're traveling the continents now. We've been to Europe. We've talked about Native and African American. Asia is next on the itinerary. And there's a whole world of plants that have come to us from the Orient.
It's just hard to separate our gardens today from the Oriental influence because so many things came to us from the Orient.
Right.
Most of our roses, our crepe myrtles, azaleas, camellias, some of those things grow better in some parts of the South than others. But I can't really imagine our gardens without crepe myrtles.
And I'm with you on that. I think, and especially I think the old Southern conception of the garden. We think of those plants, and maybe with the exception of magnolias, the dominant plants that we come to associate with the South are almost all Asian.
They are. They really they truly are. And the ones that are tough and worthwhile growing here, I think are fine. If you want to try to grow azaleas in downtown Austin, it's all right with me, but I think they're better in Tyler,
Yeah. I'll second that.
Yes.
Right.
So we need to be aware of what really does fit into our natural environment. But there are many of these Asian plants that are very adaptable. And one thing about them is that things don't stay with us if they're not pretty. People do like plants that are attractive. So just because it grows here doesn't mean that people are going to, relish it and keep it over the years.
No, and I mean, gardening is all about human choices and human preferences. And what we are left with today, typically, things keep getting better and better. We talk about cultivars.
Right.
Well, the general cultivation of our garden aesthetic is just as humanly influenced as the cultivars.
Well, and another trend that we've enjoyed getting into in the book is the edible garden thing, and the whole idea of a low-input fruit, in the garden. And again, another great area to go into that has a lot of tradition.
Right. Well, Bill, again, the book is Heirloom Gardening in the South. It's expansive. It's fun. And one thing I would say to our viewers that a lot of garden books are technical and not so fun to read. Bill's books are fun to read. So,
well, thank you, Tom.
Always a pleasure to have you on the program. And this is out there and available from all different sources.
Well, it is. Texas A&M University Press is to handle the development of it for us, and so they're making it widely available.
Well, we're lucky to have you and Greg Grant and the others, kind of pioneers of modern-day Texas gardens, with us and sharing this great information. So again, Bill, thanks for being a guest on Central Texas Gardener. I encourage all of our viewers out there to check out the book. And now we're going to check in with Daphne.
Hello and welcome to Down to Earth. I'm Daphne Richards. Our question this week involves the weather. With all of the heat stress on our plants from such an early blast of summer temperatures this year, how can we best help our plants to survive? There's several key things that you can do. First, you can replenish the mulch around your plants. Make sure to do that without getting that around the trunks of your trees, but it does need to be freshened up every year. You also don't want to fertilize right now. That might be counterintuitive, but fertilizer, as you know, would encourage growth, and growth would not be good to do with such hot temperatures outside. You want your plants to stay a little bit dormant. You also don't want to prune too much for the same reason. That does also encourage growth of lateral buds, and you want your plants to stay pretty much dormant right now. You also want to water slowly and deeply, especially in your lawns. Lower that pressure and make that water go deeper into the soil without running off. If you have any containers, go ahead and move those into the shade if possible. Those containers act like little ovens, and the roots can just bake on top of the leaves frying. You also want to mow your lawns more frequently instead of less frequently. Common thing that people do is to allow their lawns to get too tall before they mow, and then that shocks the lawn. Our plant this week is lamb's ears, Stachys byzantina. It's a wonderful evergreen for our gardens. It's a clumping ground cover. Has great fuzzy gray-green leaves, and it's great for filling in bare spots in your yard. It's mostly grown for its very large, fluffy foliage. It does great in full morning sun, but it does prefer to be protected from the intense afternoon rays. It needs regular watering, but prefers well-drained soil, so be very careful and don't overwater this plant or it will rot. Water it in the morning if at all possible so that those thick leaves will dry. It's hardy to zone 4, so our winters are not a problem, but if you've lost these in the middle of the summer in the past, consider putting them in a shadier spot. They're great here in Central Texas, but they are a little sensitive to the heat. Although some cultivars produce very showy purple flowers, this plant is normally grown for its beautiful foliage. The plants get from 6 to 12 inches tall, and the bloom spike, if it has one, can possibly add another 12 inches of height. To do in your garden this week, if you normally allow your lawn clippings to return to the soil, consider collecting them for a few mowings to start a compost pile. We'd love to hear from you. Please visit klru.org/ctg to send us your question or a plant of the week from your garden.
Thanks, Daphne. Now let's check in with Steve Kainer for Backyard Basics.
Hi, I'm Steve Kainer with Hill Country Water Gardens and Nursery, and I'm going to talk to you today about how to maintain your aquatic plants during the growing season. I have a couple of plants with me today. I have a tropical water lily as well as a Monta Davensa Sagittaria here, which is a bog plant. Couple of things, the two most important things when you're maintaining your plants during the growing season is one, the actual care of the plant itself, especially with water lilies. What will happen with water lilies this time of the year is they will actually start to get a couple things will start to happen. You'll actually start to get maybe a couple little bug bites in the plant. The fringes of the plant will start to yellow a bit, maybe brown. You may get a tear in the leaf. All okay. A lily leaf lasts about 2 weeks during the growing season, and then it starts to deteriorate. So that's fine. We're going to go ahead and trim that leaf off. We'd actually follow from the top of the leaf, follow the stem all the way to the crown of the plant. And using your thumb and your forefinger, simply snip that piece off and remove it. And then take this, remove it from the pond, because if you left this leaf and let it decay in the pond, it actually just creates a lot of organic matter within the pond itself. Probably the next most important thing you would do when trimming your plant is actually watch the blossoms themselves. A water lily blossom opens and closes for about 3 or 4 days, and then it actually becomes spent. So once that bloom is spent, the steeples close, and it actually droops into the water. You'll actually follow the stem once again to the crown, trim that off, and remove that spent bloom. This particular variety of lily is Foxfire. It's a relatively new variety. It is a tropical. You notice the serrated edges and the heavily mottled leaf. It's a really pretty plant. Now, the most important thing you can do for your water lilies during this time of the year is fertilize them. We actually use aquatic plant tabs, and with these tabs, we're actually going to physically take them and push them into the soil of the plant. The rule of thumb is that you will actually use 1 tab per gallon of pot. This particular lily is in a 2-gallon pot, so I'd actually use 2 tabs to fertilize. You'd actually take the tab, force it about 1 inch or 2 from the crown of the plant, and actually force it into the soil itself, finger depth, as deep as you can push it, okay? Actually close the hole behind it so the nutrients that are in the tab actually don't escape into your pond. I also brought with me today this Montevensis sage. You'll notice this leaf has a tear in it. Eventually it will actually start to yellow and brown as well. What I want you to do is follow that stem all the way to the crown itself also and pinch it off, or maybe use a pair of scissors, that's fine too. And also we're going to remove that from the pond. This is a 1-gallon pot. I'm going to use 1 tab to fertilize it. I'd actually do the same thing, take it in, force it in, finger depth, as deep as you can go, and you're going to be in good shape. And that's all I have today. For Backyard Basics, I'm Steve Kainer.
Visit klru.org/CTG to watch online, get more tips, and check out our blog. Next week, we look at how our gardens have changed for the better. Until then, I'll see you in the garden.